My name is Rachel, and I'm 21 years old. Ever since I was a kid, I was determined to make it on my own. When I got accepted into college on a full scholarship, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. The scholarship covered my tuition completely, but I still needed a place to live. That's when my mom came up with what seemed like a perfect solution. "I've been thinking," she said one evening while we were sitting in the kitchen. "You know that apartment I got from your grandmother a few years ago? Why don't you rent it? I'll give you a good rate way lower than what you'd pay anywhere else." I did some research, and she wasn't lying. The rent she was asking was nearly half of what similar apartments in the area were going for. It seemed like a no-brainer, even though I knew I'd have to get a job to cover it. "You'll need to sign a proper lease agreement," Mom insisted, sliding papers across the table. I always do things by the book. Within a week, I found a job at a cafe near campus. It wasn't glamorous, but between classes and shifts, I managed to make ends meet. Sure, I was exhausted most days, but it felt good to be handling things on my own. My routine was demanding, but simple: wake up, go to class, head straight to work, come home late, study until I couldn't keep my eyes open, then repeat. It wasn't easy, but I was making it work. Or at least, I thought I was until that Thursday evening when everything changed. I had just finished a particularly rough shift at the cafe. My feet ached, and all I wanted was to collapse on my couch and maybe watch some mindless TV before tackling my homework. But when I opened the door to my apartment, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, sprawled across my couch like she owned the place, was my sister Lisa. 2 large suitcases sat beside her, and she was casually scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still standing in the doorway. She barely glanced up. "Oh, hey. I'm moving in. Mom said it was fine." My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone and called Mom immediately, my hands shaking as I waited for her to pick up. "Mom, what's going on?" Lisa says she's moving in. "Is she going to pay rent too?" Her response hit me like a slap to the face. "Are you crazy, Rachel? What kind of question is that? Of course Lisa isn't paying rent. You'll keep paying what you've been paying, and she'll live there for free." "What? That's not fair. If she's living here, she should pay half." Mom's voice turned sharp, that tone she used when she wasn't going to entertain any argument. "Listen carefully, Rachel. That apartment belongs to me, and I decide who pays what. If you don't like it, you can move out." I looked up rental listings that night, but everything was way out of my price range. So I swallowed my pride and accepted the situation. Living with Lisa was like having a tornado for a roommate. Every morning, I'd wake up to find lights blazing in every room: the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. And she wouldn't even bother turning them off before leaving. "Lisa, can you please turn off the lights when you leave a room?" I asked one morning, trying to keep my voice level. "The electricity bill, oh, stop being so uptight." She cut me off, not even looking up from her phone. It's not that big a deal, but the lights were just the beginning. The real nightmare was her bathroom habits. Lisa would lock herself in there for hours, literally hours, taking endless baths while chatting with her friends. The sound of running water became the soundtrack to my anxiety. One evening, while preparing for an exam, I could hear her laughing and splashing through the bathroom door. The water had been running for over 2 hours. "Lisa," I called out, knocking, "you've been in there forever. Do you realize how much water you're wasting?" Her voice came back, muffled but annoyingly cheerful. "Chill out, sis. I'm having a spa day. Mom says I can do what I want." I retreated to my room, trying to focus on my textbook while mentally calculating how much her spa days were going to cost me. When the water finally stopped running, 3 hours had passed. Then came the utility bill. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It had doubled. I stood in the kitchen staring at the numbers, wondering how I was going to manage this on top of my other expenses. That evening, I confronted Lisa. She was sprawled on the couch, feet propped up on the coffee table, watching videos on her phone at full volume. "We need to talk about the utility bills," I said, holding up the paper. "They've doubled since you moved in. You need to be more conscious of, or what?" She finally looked up, a smirk playing on her lips. "Or you'll need to find somewhere else to live." That got her attention. She sat up straight, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "Mom specifically said I can do whatever I want here. You're supposed to serve me, remember?" That's what Mom said. Something inside me snapped. All the frustration, the unfairness, everything I'd been holding back at all came bursting out. "Pack your things," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Get out!" she screeched, jumping to her feet. "You can't do that. I'm the one paying for this place," I shot back. "And I say you're leaving." For a moment, we stood there in a standoff. Then Lisa started throwing her things into her suitcases, cursing under her breath the whole time. She slammed drawers, knocked things over, and made as much noise as possible while packing. Finally, she dragged her suitcases to the door, turned to me one last time, and spat out, "You're going to regret this." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I had barely caught my breath when my phone started ringing. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I knew this was coming, but my hands still shook as I answered. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Who do you think you are to kick your sister out?" "Mom, shut up. You had no right." She was practically screeching now. "Pack your things and get out. Either you leave or I'm doubling your rent. Your choice." The fury that had been building inside me for weeks finally boiled over. "You know what?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "I'd rather pay 5 times as much somewhere else than spend another minute dealing with this crazy situation." Before she could respond, I hung up. I stormed into my bedroom, yanked my suitcase from under the bed, and started throwing clothes into it, not even bothering to fold them. Tears of frustration blurred my vision as I moved around the apartment, gathering my things. When I got to the bookcase, I yanked it open to grab my textbooks. They were heavy, and in my angry movements, they slipped from my hands. Frustrated, I slammed the bookcase door shut with all my might. That's when it happened. Several thick books I hadn't noticed on top of the bookcase came crashing down right onto my head. Perfect. Rubbing the sore spot, I glared at the fallen books. That's when I noticed something flutter to the ground. A piece of paper had slipped out from one of them. I bent down, picking it up, assuming it was just an old receipt or bookmark. But as I unfolded it, my heart stopped. It was a legal document, a photocopy, but perfectly legible. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Last Will and Testament." And right there, in black and white, was my grandmother's name. My hands started trembling as I read further. She had left this apartment, my apartment, to me. I sank to the floor, the will clutched in my trembling hands. My mind raced, piecing everything together. The rent, the threats, the lease agreement, it all made horrible, twisted sense now. Mom had lied. Not just a small lie, not a misunderstanding. A full-on, deliberate, calculated betrayal. I remembered the day of Grandma's funeral, the way Mom stood in front of our family, so calm, so convincing. She left everything to me, she had said. All the property, all the money. She wanted me to handle everything. And no one questioned her. Not me, not our relatives. We just accepted it. And now, 2 years later, I was sitting on the floor of my own apartment, an apartment I'd been paying for, staring at the proof that it had belonged to me all along. My stomach twisted as memories resurfaced. Mom reminding me that rent was due, lecturing me about responsibility while taking my money, smiling when I thanked her for giving me a good deal. And then, just hours ago, threatening to double my rent or kick me out. She had to know I'd find out eventually. Or had she thought I'd never question it? That she could keep taking advantage of me forever? I exhaled shakily and reached for my phone. My fingers felt numb as I snapped photos of every page of the will. I checked the images twice to make sure they were clear, then attached them to a message. Me. So, when were you going to tell me about this? The message showed as delivered. Seconds later, 2 blue check marks appeared. I stared at my screen, watching as the typing bubbles popped up, then disappeared. Then popped up again. Good. Let her squirm. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. Still nothing. Mom, who always had an answer for everything, was silent. An hour later, my phone finally rang. I took a deep breath before answering. Mom. Rachel, sweetie. Her voice was artificially calm, the kind of tone she used when trying to smooth over a situation. This isn't what you think. I let out a hollow laugh. Really? Because I think it's exactly what I think. I've been meaning to tell you about this for so long, she continued, ignoring me. I just never found the right moment. But now that you know you can have the apartment, it's yours. Let's just forget about this whole unpleasant business and start fresh. I almost dropped the phone. Start fresh? I repeated, stunned. You want me to just forget everything? Forget that you hid Grandma's will from me? Forget that you tried to kick me out of my own apartment? Forget that I've been paying you rent for 2 years? Rachel, please. No, Mom. I want every penny back, every rent payment I've made to you. Silence. Then her voice lost its sweetness. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? I said coldly. After everything we've done for you, you'd sue your own mother? After everything you've done to me? You stole my inheritance, made me pay rent on my own property. And when I refused to let Lisa freeload here, you tried to evict me. So, yeah, I would dare. I hung up before she could say another word. My hands shook as I opened my banking app and scrolled through my transaction history. 23 months of rent payments, all neatly documented. I'd always been good about keeping records, something Mom used to praise me for. The irony was almost laughable. I grabbed a notebook and started calculating. Without rent to pay anymore, I actually had enough saved to hire a lawyer. A good one. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went through every bank statement, every receipt, every single piece of paper related to this apartment. By morning, I had everything I needed. The law office was quiet, with polished wood furniture and walls lined with thick legal books. I sat across from Miss Roberts, watching as she reviewed my documents. After a few minutes, she looked up, her expression unreadable. This is pretty straightforward, she said. Your grandmother clearly left you this apartment. Your mother had no legal right to collect rent from you or anyone else. I leaned forward. So what can I do? You're entitled to compensation. She pulled out a legal pad. Not just for the rent you've paid, but also for the 2 years before you moved in, when your mother was renting it to other tenants. For the next hour, we went through the numbers. Miss Roberts was methodical, calculating everything down to the last dollar. She factored in market rates, rent payments, and everything Mom had collected before I lived here. When she finally pushed the final number toward me, I had to blink twice. $60,000, she said. That's a conservative estimate. I swallowed hard. That much? She nodded. We could also pursue interest charges. Your parents have essentially been using an interest-free loan of your money for nearly 4 years. No, I interrupted. Just the rent money. That's enough. After finalizing the paperwork, I called Mom from the parking lot. My voice was steadier than I expected. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come to the apartment tomorrow? Bring the property documents. A long pause. Then, finally, fine. The next morning, I heard her key in the lock. She walked in, clutching a manila envelope, looking nervous. I brought the ownership papers, she said with a forced smile. Everything's here to transfer the apartment to your name. I've already had them prepared. She spread the documents on the kitchen table, the same table where she'd made me sign that lease agreement 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rachel, honey, she said softly, pushing the papers toward me. I know I made a terrible mistake. I'm asking for your forgiveness. Please don't be angry with me. We can put this behind us and… I slid another document across the table. The demand letter my lawyer had prepared. You have 2 weeks to pay back the $60,000 you took from me. The moment she finished reading, all pretense of remorse vanished. She shot up from her chair, knocking it over. You ungrateful little brat, she shrieked. How dare you do this to your own mother? Her voice echoed off the walls so violently that I swore I saw bits of plaster dust drift from the ceiling. The neighbors probably thought someone was being murdered. I forced myself to stay calm. You can scream all you want, Mom. It doesn't change anything. Either you pay what you owe me, or I'll file a lawsuit. Fraud charges, legal fees, your reputation, your choice. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that pictures rattled on the walls. I heard her stomping down the hallway, still yelling. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Within an hour, the calls started. First, my dad. How could you do this to us? He demanded. After everything we've done for you, you're an ungrateful child. I let out a bitter laugh. Ungrateful? That's rich coming from parents who tricked their own daughter into paying rent for an apartment she owned. He sputtered something about family loyalty. I hung up. Then Lisa. "You're ruining everything," she wailed. "If Mom and Dad have to pay you back, they won't be able to pay for my college." Not my problem, Lisa. Maybe try what I did, get a job. The calls kept coming. Mom, Dad, Lisa. Screaming, crying, guilt-tripping. When I blocked their numbers, they used different ones. After a week of this, my dad called with a different tone. "Can you give us a month instead of 2 weeks?" I considered it. Fine, 1 month. Not a day more. And just like that, the calls stopped. For the first time in weeks, the silence was suspiciously peaceful. The silence lasted exactly 1 month. No calls, no messages, nothing. At first, I thought maybe they'd given up. Maybe they had accepted that they owed me the money and were figuring out how to pay it back. But deep down, I knew better. My family didn't just give up. They were planning something. I kept my guard up, checking my bank account every day. Then, exactly 1 month after my father's last call, I saw it. $60,000. Transferred in full. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I had expected them to fight harder, to make excuses, to try one last emotional ambush. But here it was, the money they stole from me, back where it belonged. I should have felt relieved, victorious even. But all I felt was tired. A few days later, my Aunt Carol called. She had always been the family gossip, but for once, I was grateful for her nosiness. "Your parents had to take out a loan to pay you back," she said, voice tinged with concern. "They're really struggling with the payments." I sat on my couch listening as she kept talking. "And Lisa," she hesitated, as if debating whether she should say it. "She's not in college anymore. They couldn't afford the tuition." A pause, probably waiting for me to express guilt, to say, "Oh no, poor Lisa, how terrible." But all I said was, "Maybe it's time she learned to stand on her own feet." Carol sighed, but I didn't care. That's when a memory hit me, so clear it was like watching a scene from a movie. The day of Grandma's will reading. I had been getting ready to go with Mom to the notary's office, even put on my best black dress, trying to look mature and responsible. Then Mom came into my room looking concerned. "Lisa's sick," she had said. "She's running a fever. You need to stay home with her." I had felt disappointed, but I stayed. Just another sacrifice for my sister. Now I knew. Lisa probably wasn't sick at all. Just another manipulation. Another lie. The question that haunted me wasn't why my mother stole my inheritance. I understood greed. What I couldn't figure out was how she got away with it so easily. I asked Aunt Carol about the notary, but she didn't know much. Her theory made sense, though. The notary probably just took Mom's word that she would share the will with the family. Maybe she even brought a stack of documents, making it look like she was taking everything home to discuss with us. It made me wonder how many times had she lied to my face, smiling, pretending everything was normal. How many moments in my life were tainted by deception? Every time Mom praised me for being responsible with money, was she laughing inside? When she insisted on a formal lease agreement, was she congratulating herself on how clever she was? Did she and Dad discuss their scam over dinner? Did Lisa know all along? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers. What I did know was that I was done with them. I still lived in my grandmother's apartment, my apartment. The place felt different now that I wasn't paying rent to a thief. I started saving the money that used to go straight into Mom's pocket. The cafe where I worked offered me a promotion, assistant manager. Some people might think I didn't need the job anymore, now that I wasn't struggling with rent. But I had learned the value of being independent, of having my own money that no one could take from me. My phone still lit up sometimes with their names: Mom, Dad, Lisa. I blocked their numbers, but they kept trying from new ones. I deleted their voicemails without listening. What could they possibly say? Sorry we stole your inheritance? Sorry we made you pay rent on your own property? Sorry we only got caught because some books fell on your head? Most days I was okay. I went to classes, worked my shifts, studied in the evenings. I redecorated the apartment, making it feel like my own space instead of a crime scene. But sometimes, late at night, the anger crept back in. Not just at the theft, but at the years of lies. The casual cruelty of making me believe my grandmother hadn't cared enough to leave me anything. My therapist said it was normal, that it wasn't just about the money or the apartment. It was about trust, family, betrayal. She helped me work through it, teaching me ways to stay calm when the memories threatened to overwhelm me. I started a new tradition. Every Sunday morning, I sat in Grandma's old reading chair by the window, drinking coffee from her favorite mug. I thought about her, about how she wanted me to have this place, about how she trusted me to take care of it. And in those moments, I felt close to her again. Like, maybe, somehow, she knew that the truth had finally come out. Weeks passed, then months. Life settled into something that finally felt like mine. No more walking on eggshells. No more financial stress. No more phone calls filled with guilt and manipulation. For the first time in years, I felt free. I focused on school and work, moving up at the cafe. My savings grew, and I started making plans for the future. Maybe I'd study abroad for a semester. Maybe I'd move to a better neighborhood once I graduated. Maybe I'd finally get a real vacation one that didn't involve scraping together leftover tips to afford gas for a road trip to nowhere. But just when I thought my family was out of my life for good, they found a new way to crawl back in. It started with an email from my dad. Subject: let's be reasonable. Rachel, this has gone on long enough. We are still your parents. Family should not be about money. Your mother is very upset and Lisa is struggling because of what you did. I hope you can find it in your heart to make things right. Dad. I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. What I did? I forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. The sheer audacity of it all. They stole from me, lied to me, and now, somehow, I was the villain? I deleted the email without responding, but it didn't stop there. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. Lisa, I hope you're happy. Mom's depressed. Dad is miserable, and I had to drop out of college because of you. Because of me? I almost responded. Almost. But then I stopped myself. What was the point? She wasn't looking for an actual conversation. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted me to crumble and say, I'm so sorry, Lisa. Let me fix everything for you. But I was done fixing things for them. I blocked the number. Then, a few days later, I ran into Aunt Carol while grabbing coffee before work. She spotted me first and waved me over. I debated pretending I hadn't seen her, but that would have been pointless. Carol was relentless. She wasted no time getting to the point. Your mom called me crying last night. I sighed, already exhausted. Of course she did. She says you're ignoring them. Yep. Carol hesitated. Rachel, they're struggling. Your parents had to take out a huge loan, and they're barely making payments. Lisa had to move back home. Things are really bad, I shrugged. Not my problem. Carol frowned. I get it. I do. But maybe it's time to let it go. They're still your family. I sipped my coffee, debating how much to say. Then I set the cup down and met her gaze. Carol, tell me something. If I had never found Grandma's will, if I had never realized the truth, do you think they ever would have told me? Or would they have just kept taking my money? Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. I grabbed my coffee and stood up. Exactly. I thought that would be the end of it. But a week later, there was a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, my stomach twisted. Mom. I debated pretending I wasn't home, but I knew she wouldn't leave. I cracked the door open but didn't step aside. What do you want? She looked smaller than I remembered, older, more fragile. But I knew better than to let that fool me. I just want to talk, she said, voice soft. I didn't move. You have 5 minutes. She nodded, then glanced around, as if expecting me to invite her in. I didn't. Rachel, she started, I know you're still angry. I don't blame you. I made mistakes. Mistakes. What a neat little word to describe stealing $60,000 and gaslighting your own daughter. But things are hard right now, she continued. Your father and I are struggling to make payments on the loan. Lisa's life is ruined. She was supposed to graduate next year, but now I held up a hand. Stop, Mom blinked. What? I don't care. Her face twisted in shock, as if I had slapped her. You expect me to feel bad? To swoop in and save you? You had years to do the right thing. Instead, you lied. You took my money. And now that you finally have to deal with the consequences of your actions, you want me to bail you out? Tears welled in her eyes. No, I cut her off. I'm done. She sniffled, looking at me with that same expression she always used when she wanted something. But I wasn't that girl anymore. You should go, I said, stepping back to close the door. Rachel, please. I shut the door in her face. I stood there, heart pounding, listening to the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall. Then I locked the door. That night, I blocked her email. I thought that would be it, but my family wasn't done yet. A few days later, my landlord knocked on my door. I opened it, confused. Hey, Rachel. Just wanted to check in, he said. Your mother called me. I tensed. What? She was asking if there was a way to remove your name from the lease. Said there had been a mistake and that the apartment should still be under her. I stared at him, rage bubbling under my skin. What did you tell her? He laughed. Told her that's not how it works. The title is in your name now. She has no legal claim. I exhaled, some of the tension leaving my body. Thank you. No problem, he said. Figured. I'd warn you, though. She sounded desperate. I nodded. Yeah, she is. After he left, I sat on my couch trying to process everything. Mom had lost. She knew she had lost. But instead of accepting it, she was still grasping for control. It was almost pathetic. Almost. I should have been angry, but mostly, I just felt done. She had taken everything from me once. She wasn't going to do it again. So I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat in Grandma's old chair, and looked out the window. The sky was clear, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, I truly felt at peace too. The next few weeks passed quietly. No more emails, no more surprise visits, no more attempts to manipulate me into feeling guilty. It was almost unsettling. I kept waiting for something to happen, for my parents to pull another stunt, for Lisa to send a dramatic text, for some last-ditch effort to reclaim control. But nothing came. Maybe they had finally given up, or maybe they were just biding their time. I focused on my own life. Work at the cafe kept me busy, and for the first time, I could actually enjoy my paychecks instead of watching them disappear into my mother's bank account. I started going out more, making friends, saying yes to things I would have declined before because I couldn't afford it. It felt good. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, flipping through channels, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. Is this Rachel Carter? I sat up. Yes? My name is Susan White. I'm a financial investigator. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your parents. My pulse kicked up. What's this about? There was a pause then. It would be easier to discuss in person. Would you be available to meet sometime this week? I hesitated. I had no idea who this woman was or what she wanted, but something told me I needed to hear her out. Yeah, I said finally. I can meet tomorrow. We agreed on a time and place, and when I hung up, I just sat there, staring at my phone. What the hell was going on? The next afternoon, I met Susan at a small office downtown. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored blazer, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She wasted no time getting to the point. I've been looking into your parents, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Your mother, specifically. I opened it, my stomach tightening. Inside were financial records, bank statements, transaction histories, things I didn't fully understand, but knew were bad. What am I looking at? Susan folded her hands. Your mother has been involved in some questionable financial activity for a while now. We've been investigating reports of fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of funds. I blinked. I what? She nodded toward the papers. You might not realize this, but your situation, the stolen inheritance, the rent payments, the falsified lease agreement is part of a larger pattern. Your mother has a history of manipulating finances to her advantage. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I had known she was selfish. I had known she was manipulative. But this? Susan studied me. Did you ever notice anything unusual about your family's finances growing up? Any sudden influxes of money? Unexplained expenses? I thought back. The expensive vacations. The designer clothes Lisa always had. The way Mom always insisted we were just getting by whenever I needed something, yet somehow had money for everything Lisa wanted. Oh my God, I whispered. Susan nodded. It's not just you, Rachel. You're not the first person she's taken advantage of. And you might not be the last. A cold, sick feeling settled in my stomach. What happens now? She sighed. That depends. Right now, we're still gathering evidence. But if this case moves forward, your mother could be facing legal consequences. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. I should have felt relieved, vindicated. But all I felt was tired. I'll help however I can, I said finally. Susan nodded. That's all I needed to hear. By the time I left the office, my head was spinning. My mother wasn't just a liar. She wasn't just a thief. She was a criminal. And she had been getting away with it for years. I didn't tell anyone what I had learned. Not yet. I needed time to process, to decide what, if anything, I wanted to do. But then, a few days later, Lisa showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her since the night I kicked her out. She looked different, not as put together, like she hadn't been sleeping well. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide my exhaustion. She crossed her arms. I need to talk to you. I debated slamming the door in her face but sighed and stepped aside. She walked in, looking around. You redecorated. I did. She sat on the couch like she had a right to be there. Mom and Dad are in trouble. I laughed, shaking my head. No kidding. She ignored the sarcasm. Mom told me everything. About the investigation. About how you're helping them build a case against her. I stiffened. I never said I was helping anyone. I haven't even decided what to do yet. Lisa's eyes flashed. Then don't. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Don't testify. Don't give them anything. I scoffed. Why the hell would I protect her? Lisa clenched her jaw. Because she's our mom. I stared at her, unblinking. That didn't seem to matter when she was stealing from me. She flinched but kept going. She's scared, Rachel. If she gets arrested, what happens to Dad? To me? You mean, what happens to the people who benefited from her stealing? Her expression darkened. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I exhaled sharply. No, Lisa, I'm not. I don't want any of this. But Mom made her choices. And now she has to deal with them. Lisa's hands curled into fists. You're such a selfish bee. Get out. She froze. I pointed to the door. I don't owe you anything. I gave you a free place to live. I paid for everything while you sat around and did nothing. And when I finally stood up for myself, you sided with the people who stole from me. Lisa's face turned red, but she didn't argue. She just stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. If she goes to jail, that's on you. I didn't even blink. No, Lisa. That's on her. She slammed the door behind her. I let out a breath, feeling a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what my family thought of me. I wasn't their pawn anymore. I was free. Lisa didn't come back. I expected more, another tantrum, another desperate plea, another attempt to guilt me into fixing the mess our parents had created. But after she stormed out, there was only silence. And that silence stretched into weeks. At first, it felt strange. No texts, no calls. No one pounding at my door, demanding I make things right. For so long, my life had revolved around their chaos, their needs, their endless expectations. Now it was just quiet. I kept working at the cafe, saving money, going to classes, making plans for the future. But beneath it all, I knew the storm wasn't over. I just didn't expect it to hit so soon. One afternoon, I got a call from Susan White, the investigator. I answered immediately. It's happening, she said without preamble. Your mother's being charged. I felt my pulse in my ears. For what exactly? Fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. She's been funneling money through fake accounts for years, using stolen funds to finance personal expenses. Your case was just one part of a much bigger picture. I sat down, gripping the phone tighter. So what now? She'll have a court date soon. We may need your testimony. I let out a breath. Okay. Susan hesitated. Rachel, the first need to ask, are you prepared for what this could mean? I swallowed hard. You mean, am I ready to be the one who helps send my mother to prison? Susan didn't say anything. I sighed. She did this to herself, and I meant it. I wasn't the villain here. I wasn't the one who stole. I wasn't the one who lied. But still, that night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours. remembering every moment of my childhood that now felt tainted. The way she'd kiss my forehead and tell me she was proud of me. The times she'd make my favorite meals when I had a bad day. The nights we stayed up late watching movies, wrapped in blankets, laughing over nothing. Were any of those moments real? Or was I just another asset she managed? Another resource she could drain? The weight of it all pressed down on me. Then, 3 days before her court date, I got another email. Subject, I'm still your mother. Rachel, I know you're angry. I know you think you're doing the right thing. But do you really want to see me behind bars? Do you want that on your conscience? You were always my responsible one, my smart girl. That's why I trusted you with everything. That's why I knew you'd understand. I made mistakes, yes, but I did it for this family. For you. You have the power to stop this. Just say you won't testify. That's all you have to do. Please, Rachel. Mom. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. It was masterful, really. Just the right mix of guilt, manipulation, and nostalgia. She didn't beg. She didn't insult me. She framed herself as the victim, knowing it would get under my skin. And for a brief, fleeting second, I almost fell for it. Almost. But then I remembered something Susan had said in our first meeting. You're not the first person she's done this to. And you might not be the last. This wasn't just about me. I closed the email. I didn't respond. 3 days later, I walked into the courthouse. I sat on the witness stand, hands steady, voice clear. I told them everything. How she forged documents, how she stole my inheritance, how she made me pay rent on an apartment that legally belonged to me. And when I was done, I looked over at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. For the first time in my life, I saw her for what she really was. Not a mother, not a protector. Just a woman who thought she could take whatever she wanted. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't immediate, but eventually, the trial ended. She was sentenced to prison. Not for life, not forever, but long enough. Long enough for me to move on. Lisa didn't reach out after that. Neither did my father, and I was okay with that. I kept the apartment. I finished college. I traveled. I built a life that was truly mine. Every Sunday morning, I still sat in Grandma's old chair by the window, drinking coffee from her favorite mug. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she was there with me. Like she knew that, in the end, I had won. Story 2. My mother used to tell me stories when I was a child about my grandpa, how he began with nothing and established a business that could have provided for us all. But we never saw a single penny of it. It wasn't until I was older and could comprehend the chaos around his will and everything else that I truly understood why. Eliza. Your grandfather was a hearty person. According to my mother, we were drinking cups of lukewarm tea while seated at our tiny kitchen table one winter evening. The landlord took a while to fix the heater once it broke again. He simply thought that money should be earned rather than given. Then why did he interrupt us? He expected you to handle his finances properly, didn't he? I asked, trying to keep the animosity out of my voice. Mom sighed, her eyes tracking the steam rising from her cup. I wasn't supposed to handle it. Having a wild concept, he created a will that would only distribute his riches to someone who achieved success on their own. $500,000, at least in their business. That is simply inhumane. I whispered. The notion appeared absurd. A man who valued his wealth over his family created the game. It was either his way or no way, Mom went on. He virtually disowned me when I argued with him. If I was any good, they said. Without his aid, I would go my own path. The inequity of everything. Not at me. While someone else was enjoying what should have been ours, we were scrounging and conserving every penny. I've always had a talent for seeing an opportunity to profit. On hot summer days, I would set up a lemonade shop at the nearby golf course. A cup costs $0.50. I would shout and wave to the golfers who were thirsty. The pitch from a freckle-faced child with a pitcher was too strong for them to ignore. You're a real hustler, youngster. I was told this by an elderly golfer called Hank, who was laughing as he gave me his change. Keep that up and you'll be a tycoon one day. I smiled and put the coins in my pocket. Just accumulating funds for a major purchase, I'd say. I'm constantly thinking about the next big thing. It wasn't just lemonade either. Using beads I found at the dollar shop, I strung together handmade bracelets and ornaments. Everywhere I could, I sold them. Block gatherings throughout the neighborhood, school functions, and even garage sales in the front yard. It wasn't all fun trading. It felt natural, as if it were my destiny. Eliza has a small business empire of her own. I stood a little higher when my mom joked with her friends because of the pride in her voice. However, what truly stood out was the stitching. It felt like all of my Christmases had arrived at once when I was able to purchase that vintage sewing machine at a yard sale. It was difficult for me to learn how to sew. The online training weren't always clear, and the machine was erratic, particularly when there were intermittent outages in the internet connection. However, I persisted. Soon I was going drab. Thrift store discoveries into fashionable clothes. Eliza, did you wear the same shirt last week? One day, Sarah spotted me at my locker and scoffed. It looks different. Yes, made a small change to it. With a nonchalant smack of my locker, I said, "You ought to give it a try sometime. It might help you feel better." With a sneer, she left, but a few other females followed. "What you did with your shirt was extremely awesome. Are you able to accomplish mine?" With a bashful grin on her lips, one of them inquired, "Yes, of course. Bring it tomorrow." My heart swelled with pride as I answered. After word spread, I started accepting bespoke orders. It was now actual business and not just pocket money. People were willing to pay a high price for uniqueness, which I was more than happy to supply. I carried my most recent masterpieces to the neighborhood street festival one lovely day. I arranged my clothes on a flimsy table and waited. The excitement of it all makes my heart race. "Do you think these will be purchased?" With a skeptical glance at the onlookers, my friend said, "Mike? They would be insane not to." I retaliated with confidence, and they did the same. They crowded my table. In the midst of the confusion, I hardly had time to get the money and give the clothes. A man with jangling automobile keys walked up to me. "Hey, a block away from here, my car broke down. I saw your booth. Is this stuff yours?" He nodded at my improvised presentation and inquired, "Yes. I made it everything. While you wait for a tow, you need something to do." I gave him a shirt and joked. His laugh was a real one, with his head thrown back. "Actually, I wanted to know if you also do things for males." "Sure," I said, taking out a couple of the pieces I had tried. After glancing over them, he gave me a curious glance. "You're talented. Have you considered turning this into a legitimate business?" "Each day," I said. "Not a beat is missed." His grin got bigger. "By the way, my name is Jack." I shook his hand and said, "Eliza," feeling the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary sale. As the day came to an end, this felt like a doorway swinging wide open. As I tallied the money, I felt a wave of satisfaction. It was this. One stitch at a time, I was bringing it about. "Said they would adore your belongings," Mike said while assisting me with packing. "Indeed, you were correct," I acknowledged, not being able to hide my smile. It appears that I may actually reach the 500,000 milestone. Things started off more quickly than I had anticipated after Jack and I met at the fair. He was different from the men I knew. He was from a wealthy family, but when you were with him, you forgot about it. There was something relaxed about him, always making plans, always smiling. We began spending more time together, and soon we were in a committed relationship. "Eliza, I think it's time you met my parents," he stated one day. Just thinking about it made my stomach turn. I was aware that these people belonged to the old money, the type that denigrated others like me. "Are you certain?" My voice was tense as I asked. "I doubt they will be very fond of me." Jack dismissed it with a laugh. "They will adore you. Try not to worry too much." It seemed like the longest journey of my life as I drove to Jack's parents' house. My stomach was in knots, but Jack continued to chat about unimportant topics, presumably in an attempt to diffuse the situation. It was a huge house that resembled a museum, more than a house when we turned into a lengthy driveway. Before we could even knock, the door opened as we approached the majestic entryway. Even though I had chosen my clothes carefully, I felt instantly underdressed when I saw Miss S. Thompson, Jack's mother, standing there in immaculate clothing. She pulled him into an embrace and said, "Jack, darling," before turning to face me with a kind but short-lived grin. "You must be Eliza, too. You've been talked about a lot." Her tone was anything but warm. Even though her words sounded that way, I made an effort to grin. "Thank you, Miss S. Thompson, for having me." Mr. Thompson showed just as Jack ushered me inside. His handshake seemed more like a test than a hello, and he was a tall, stern-looking man. "Eliza is enjoyable." His voice was low and emotionless as he spoke. The living room was just as opulent and chilly as the rest of the mansion. Everything seemed official and rigid. At least they engaged in small chat with us. I felt out of my element, so I just grinned and nodded. Dinner was served in a dining room that looked like it belonged in a magazine, complete with fine china and crystal that should have been kept in a display case rather than used for eating. The actual interrogation started after we sat down. "Jack informs us that you are interested in fashion design, Eliza." Mr. Thompson started glancing at me as if I were an issue. He had to figure it out. "I do own a little business, yes. I make clothes and sell them," I answered, attempting to stabilize my kid. "If it's self-made, how entrepreneurial?" His remarks were abrasive. In his tone, it sounded more like a check mark on a list of curiosities than a compliment. With a wince-like smile, Miss S. Thompson added her voice. "What about your family? Oh dear. What are they doing?" "Well, my mother and I are alone. She works as a nurse." I spoke, each syllable carrying weight. "Oh, I see," said Miss S. Thompson, looking at her husband in a way I couldn't quite interpret. Until coffee was brought, the discussion faltered, and suddenly Miss S. Thompson's courteous mask fell off. "I have to be honest, Eliza. For Jack and his companions, we have specific expectations. We care about background. It is necessary to preserve the family's heritage and reputation." At last, she set down her fork and spoke bluntly. "You've obviously accomplished a lot. I don't believe you're a good fit for our son, regardless of your background." Her comments hit me like a slap, I'm afraid. As she rose from the table, I sat there in disbelief. She said, "I won't waste any more time here," and walked out of the room without saying anything else. Jack's cheeks reddened with shame, but he was eager to console me. "Don't take it personally, Eliza." She said that it was difficult to accept her ways. The night had become a glaring demonstration of my position alongside his family. What should have been a joyful milestone was marred by the lingering, icy shadow of that dinner, even after Jack's assurances. Despite the chilly meal at Jack's parents' house that evening, the engagement took place. Despite his parents' obvious disapproval, Jack proceeded with the proposal. I couldn't get rid of the cold from his parents, even though I was thrilled that we were formally engaged. A few weeks following our engagement, Jack's mother, Miss S. Thompson, called me. Her tone was cold and stiff. "I want you to come over, Eliza. We have to talk about something crucial." Jack's parents were waiting when I got there. It seemed as though all the warmth had been drawn from the home, making it feel colder than before. Mrs. Thompson wasted little time. "We have extensively investigated your background, Eliza." With a harsh and inhospitable tone, she started. Mr. Thompson gave a sharp nod. "Your world is obviously very different from ours." His wife went on, "And to be honest, we think you're using our son as a means of obtaining riches. However, we will not allow our family's wealth to be at risk." Miss S. Thompson shoved a stack of papers across the table in my direction before I could react to the hurtful comments. She said bluntly, "You'll have to sign this since I can't get Jack to reconsider this marriage." I grabbed the documents. I read them, and they were a prenuptial agreement. It seemed obvious that neither I nor any of Jack's children would claim any of his fortune. "We may have." I signed them without hesitation. I returned the signed documents to her and declared, "I'm not marrying Jack for his money." Mrs. Thompson's eyes were wide with surprise. Mr. Thompson even arched an eyebrow, taken aback by my prompt obedience. I felt a mixture of relief and hatred when I left their home. I told Jack everything. He dismissed it with a laugh. "You truly showed them, however. Well done." However, I didn't like the way he laughed. "Do you not find it bothersome that your mother holds me in such low regard?" "Jack, she made me seem bad." He smiled as he shrugged. "You know how Mom is, so I understand why you're unhappy. She has her justifications, and she's not entirely incorrect to be concerned, is she?" He slapped me with his words. In addition to insulting me, Jack was now quietly supporting his mother. The realization that perhaps he wasn't totally on my side was painful. As the wedding day approached, a year after our engagement, my life was filled with both tension and joy. I had created a sportswear brand from the ground up, and it was finally taking off. Seeing my works worn and adored was an exciting experience. I had saved up enough money to grow and take on more difficult tasks. Regarding the wedding, I desired a small, private ceremony. Jack, however, had different plans. He had an extravagant celebration in his dream. This was the only time Eliza did this. "Let's go huge." With a smile that made it difficult to argue, he would say. I accepted, and together we organized a spectacular celebration. I ended up paying for a magnificent location, fine dining, and a band that would have our guests dancing all night long. I was able to negotiate discounts wherever I could and get some deals. Old habits don't go away easily. On the surface, the wedding day seemed ideal. Jack and I couldn't stop grinning as our visitors appeared to be having a great time. We were enmeshed in a bubble of happiness and were floating. However, not everyone joined in the celebration. I heard Jack's parents talking throughout the evening, their faces pressed together in displeasure. Ever the social butterfly, his mother drifted around the room, hinting at her concerns that I was after their family's fortune. I heard her informing some family members. Isn't it all incredibly extravagant? All I can hope is that she sees the importance of money and not simply how to squander it. Her remarks hurt more than I anticipated, and her voice was loud enough to be heard. Things didn't calm down after the wedding. On social media, Jack's mother bemoaned the fact that Jack had wed someone similar to me. She expressed in her writing her dread of losing her kid to an unworthy lady. It was painful to read those lines. My eyes burned with frustration as much as despair, and my throat constricted. I made an effort to discuss it with Jack. Postings from your mother. They are rather severe. Are you able to speak with them? They have no idea how well the firm is going. Jack let out a sigh, his expression troubling Eliza. I understand it's difficult, but let's avoid upsetting anyone, shall we? It's just the way my folks are. However, they believe me to be a gold digger. Jack, they fail to realize that I am not in need of their funds. He drew me in. His tone was comforting. I understand, but let's put it out of our minds for the time being. They'll change their minds. To see what I see, they only need time. I nodded, worn out from the debate but not persuaded. I decided to let it go because I was too exhausted to argue, not because I believed he was correct. It was simpler to concentrate on my business and put all of my efforts into something constructive, and uniquely my orders flooded in, my brand found traction, and my business continued to expand despite the emotional upheaval. I was conducting photo shoots, interviews, and even discussing collaborations. I thrived on the hustle and had busy days. The charity dinner took place in a fancy hotel downtown on the evening of the event. The main goal of the event was to support youth and teen sports programs. As the primary costume designer, I had chosen a blue and white color scheme that went well with the decor and some of my most recent sportswear designs. Jack and I entered the grand hall, a space filled with elegantly attired visitors and glistening lighting. Seeing my works displayed in such a magnificent location made me both anxious and thrilled. When we saw his parents on the other side of the room, that enthusiasm soon faded. The warmth of the crowded crowd was pierced by their icy gazes. Jack saw but remained silent, and I was severely hurt by their flagrant indifference. However, I bit my lip and continued to move. I moved about the room, networking and conversing as others started to arrive. Although Jack was at my side and was his normal, endearing self, I could sense that the enormity of the occasion was a little overwhelming him. "You're really going out all the stops," Jack said as we watched the gathering from a distance. "You know, go big or go home," I winked in response. "You've surpassed yourself, Eliza." From behind me came a voice I recognized. As I turned back, I noticed a local sports star who had previously worn my creations. "These are excellent uniforms. Many thanks. Have fun tonight." I gave them a business card while grinning. "Let's get together soon." The atmosphere was electric with warmth and energy, and the event was humming. Then came the time of truth. The presenter came to the stage to thank the sponsors. And when he began to talk, my heart began to accelerate. When the evening's presenter entered the stage to begin the program, we had barely been seated. Up until it was time to acknowledge the sponsors, the mood was vibrant and full of cheers and clapping. When my identity was revealed as one of the primary contributors, my pulse beat with both pride and fear. I want to thank Eliza in particular for making today possible with her kind contribution of more than $300. Oh. Through the microphone, the presenter roared. The acclaim in the room was suddenly broken by Jack's mother, Miss S. Thompson, shrieking. Not at all. The room became silent in amazement as she let out a scream. When she was given a microphone, she didn't hesitate to demand it. This is ridiculous. There was no way Eliza could afford this. Using my son's money, she is nothing more than a destitute beggar. She is a crafty predator who infiltrates our family to defraud us. Her remarks were loud and reverberated throughout the hall. Astonished yet calm, the presenter made a hasty attempt to rectify the situation. I promise you're wrong, Mrs. Thompson. Eliza's business is incredibly prosperous and able to show this kind of charity. I have personal experience with this. The anxiety was evident as the throng whispered. The host then made the surprising decision to hand Jack the microphone in the hopes that he would clear the air. Jack's area was a mixture of conflict and shame. His voice was no more than a whisper as he spoke into the microphone, first looking at his parents and then at me. I have nothing to say. He then proceeded to his parents, leaving me standing by myself in a sea of murmurs. My shoulders began to feel the weight of the situation. In addition to the charges, Jack's failure to stand up for me and acknowledge the reality of my accomplishments made me feel vulnerable and ashamed. The drama taking place all around me overwhelmed the pride I had felt in my contribution. With my heart racing but my determination unwavering, I stepped into the limelight and walked up to the microphone. Good evening to everybody. I appreciate you coming here this evening. I began, speaking steadily in spite of the emotional turmoil. I want to talk about something really personal about my trip tonight. There was silence in the room. Everyone is focused on me. I began my career as a street vendor, motivated by a dream, not merely to make ends meet. The sportswear company that many of you are familiar with today was founded as a result of that idea. I paused and glanced around, encountering the gazes of both seasoned business people and youthful athletes. I kept a promise I made to a very important individual when my company's profits reached $500,000. My granddad, I went on, my voice getting louder. He bequeathed his fortune, specifying that it would be given to a relative who achieved success of their own and reached that precise amount in their firm. The hall was filled with whispers, and I paused to process that information. My personal development and charitable giving have both benefited from that heritage. As I continued to tell my experience, the audience listened, with some nodding, much like at tonight's event. My company did more than simply survive the epidemic. It flourished, multiplying several times. Every obstacle encountered served as a springboard. In conclusion, I stand before you as a person who believes in the strength of tenacity and determination. In addition to being a company owner, the audience exploded in cheers. A few visitors stood in a standing ovation. I looked around the gathering and saw appreciation and respect light up faces. But for a moment, Jack's parents were in my line of sight. Their previously arrogant faces have changed to ones of shock and shame. They left the motel in silence. Jack, who appeared just as startled, attempted to come up to me and muttered an apology. I simply went by him and shook my head, Eliza. My feelings were a mixture of heartbreak and victory. I wanted time away from everything, not just the drama of the evening. I opted to stay at the motel that night, along with my thoughts. My phone rang later as I was sitting quietly in my hotel room. Mom was the one. She spoke with a lot of emotion. I saw it all, honey. I simply want you to know how proud I am of you for standing there and reclaiming your truth while sharing your experience. You are all that I wished you were. I went back home after staying at the hotel for a night to get my thoughts straight. It was a different place, somehow heavier, as though the stress from the previous few months was contained inside the walls themselves. Jack was waiting there. He made another attempt at apology as soon as he spotted me. I really apologize for everything, Eliza. Can we just go on and forget about this? His voice was frantic as he begged. I gave a headshake. The choice was difficult for me, but I knew what I was doing. I can't, Jack. Someone who can't defend me and who chooses his parents above his wife is not someone I want to be with. It goes beyond last night. This has been accumulating for a while. He reached out as his face collapsed. However, I took a step back. I'm going to file for divorce. I spoke aggressively. I didn't wait for his response. After gathering some necessities, I headed to my mother's house, which I had recently purchased with my grandfather's legacy. It seemed like a haven. I had walked through after the storm. The divorce process was simple. It ended swiftly because of the prenuptial agreement we had signed and the fact that we had no children. Jack's parents attempted to step in during that period. They kept calling, attempting to make amends not for me, but because their son's way of life had changed since I was gone. I banned their phone numbers. It was to cut off a history that was preventing me from moving forward, not only to stop the incessant ringing, genuine companions. I was told that Jack began drinking, lost his job, and was finally shunned by his parents. He didn't want his downward spiral to damage their reputation. In spite of everything, I had a twinge of sadness for him. Though I knew I had to move on, I never wished him any harm. I had to focus on what could have been rather than what had really happened. I found the tranquility I needed to consider my options while living at my mother's house. I continued to put more effort into the business, which was still doing well, to strengthen the basis for my future, not only to divert attention from the divorce. My mom and I had begun together one evening when we were sitting in the garden. She smiled softly as she turned to face me. Eliza, you made the correct decision. It's difficult, but you're more resilient. I'm here too, always. Thank you, Mother. I am aware that there is a lot to take in. Feeling the weight of her encouragement, I answered. As long as you remember that you're not simply surviving, you're developing, growing, and learning. That's what counts. Squeezing my hand, she said. She was correct. My marriage wasn't simply over when it ended. It opened a new chapter in my life, one in which I could make choices without worrying about whether I had support from others, one where I could stand on my own. In addition to being a prosperous businesswoman, her experiences have changed her as a person. Story 3. I'm Jennifer, and I've been by myself for the majority of my life. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed away in a car accident when I was only 5 years old. She was everything to me. My anchor, my guidance, my soul family. When she passed away shortly before my wedding, I felt I'd found a new family. And Mark, my then fiancé, we'd been married for 2 years, living in a gorgeous 2-story home I'd rented before our wedding. When we were married, it made sense to stay there because it was at the ideal location. I honestly thought we had the ideal setup once Mark put the motorized items in. I was able to successfully balance my career and our home life because I was an assistant editor-in-chief at a large publishing house and worked from home. What's so wonderful about this house? Mark would frequently comment, stretched on our couch after supper. It is large enough for family get-togethers. My parents would like this place. Every time he brought this up, I would grin uneasily. Yeah, perhaps, I would say, attempting to conceal my uneasiness. I was uncomfortable with the idea of home visitors, but I never really talked about it. To Mark, the day his sister Sarah unexpectedly arrived with her 2 elementary-aged children, Tommy and Lisa, everything changed. I still recall entering the door and seeing them standing there, bags in hand. Surprise! Sarah shouted as she pushed by me and entered the home. The kids need some quality time with their uncle, masculine influence and all that. I stood there motionless as her children, Tommy and Lisa, raced straight to our spotless living room with dirty sneakers. Mark came up behind me, grinning broadly. Isn't this fantastic, Jen? Sarah may take over the office while the children remain in the guest room. The office? I stuttered. But that's where I work. As he carried their things upstairs, he added, Honey, you can work anywhere. It's only during the break from school. As I lay awake that first night, I could hear the mayhem below. Sarah grumbling about the food I had prepared and her children fighting over the TV remote. I didn't realize that this was only the beginning. I had no idea that this particular moment would start a chain of events that would end my marriage. The weeks that followed were a living misery. Sarah's children had gotten totally out of hand. Even though I had edited several young adult novels about problematic teenagers, I had never witnessed youngsters act in such a manner. "Hello!" "A foolish woman," Tommy would shout at me from the other side of the breakfast table. He had what I believed were merely dirt on his hands. "Pancakes, please." "Tommy," I started by trying to reason with him. "Kindly wash your hands. Secondly, Aunt Jen, or Jennifer, is my name. Anyhow, fool," Lisa would interrupt, purposefully splattering her orange juice on the ground. "Mom says you're not truly family, therefore we don't have to listen to you." Sarah would sit there scrolling through her phone, looking up sometimes to say things like kids will be kids or they're just expressing themselves. But I would look at her expecting her to correct them. I was trying to fulfill a very important work deadline one, especially difficult morning when Sarah stormed into my temporary office in the living room. As though I were her personal cook, she declared that the children needed lunch, something sugar-free and organic. Perhaps some gluten-free sandwiches and freshly squeezed juice? "I have a very significant deadline, Sarah." I got begun. She rolled her eyes and interrupted. "Oh, please. You spend your entire day typing at home. That isn't actual labor. Not like motherhood." In a never-ending cycle of cleaning, cooking, and attempting to rescue my job, the days blended together. Accountable parties. Every day, the children would hurl food at meals, wipe their filthy hands on the walls, and ruin their rooms. The worst thing? Mark didn't appear to notice any of it. The school vacations finally came to an end after what seemed like a lifetime. I had a serious talk with Mark the morning Sarah and the children departed. "Mark, we must discuss the recent events," I remarked, still fatigued from the event. "What are you saying? It was wonderful to have them here." With real puzzlement, he answered. "No, it wasn't. The children of your sister were utterly rude. I was unable to complete any job since she did not provide any assistance. Don't invite anyone else without first talking to me, please." Mark nodded, seeming surprised. "I'll talk to you first the next time, I swear, honey." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked to get our house and my mental health back on track. My job obligations had piled up dangerously high. The furniture needed to be thoroughly cleaned, and the walls needed to be repainted. I also recalled something significant regarding our leasing agreement around this period. "Mark, I mentioned one night that I should let you know that our landlord is quite particular about visitors. There are explicit provisions about it in the agreement." He dismissively waved his hand. "Don't stress over that. Why don't we simply put my name on the lease? In this manner, you will no longer have to worry about it." The following day, we changed the lease to his name, but I still made my regular rent payments from my account. After 6 months, everything had finally settled back to normal, or so I believed. One Tuesday morning, Mark's joyful voice came from the kitchen as I was catching up on work. "Mom, you are welcome to remain with us. There's plenty of space for us. Dad and you are welcome to use the main bedroom. We'll go to the guest room below." I felt sick to my stomach. His mother was talking about sewage repairs and water being shut off at their house when I hurried to the kitchen. Pulling at his sleeve, I said frantically, "Mark, could we first discuss this?" He put his hand over the phone. "A place to stay is needed while the plumbing is mended for Mom and Dad." "What is there to discuss?" We got into our first serious argument in months that night. "Mark, you promised me. You made a pledge. Together we talked about these topics. Jen, what are you asking me to do?" He lost his temper. "They are my parents. Without flowing water, I can't abandon them. Quit being so self-centered." My in-laws showed up the following morning with enough bags to last till the end of time. In a matter of hours, my mother-in-law, Linda, had moved my kitchen cabinets, remarked on the dust on the windowsills, and chastised me for the cleaning supplies I had chosen. Jennifer called from the living room, where she was giving her husband Bob furniture placement instructions. "My darling, we'll have supper once you finish whatever it is you're doing on that computer. Something big. Not those dumb salads of yours." I tightened my jaw. "Actually, Linda, I'm at work at the moment. There's a deadline for me. Are you at work?" She glanced at Bob and chuckled. "Spending the day sitting at home. Work about supper now, isn't it?" The days blended together. Linda was standing over my shoulder, making comments about my posture while I attempted to send emails. She insisted that I properly wash the laundry while I was editing manuscripts. It turns out that I have been folding sheets incorrectly for my whole adult life. I begged for assistance one evening, Mark. when I'm unable to stay on top of things. He responded, "You're right," and I briefly felt relieved. I ought to take a break from my job. I grinned in appreciation. But then he mentioned that my dad and I were considering going fishing. Spend some quality time together as a father and son, a excursion to fish. I was shocked to hear it. I did not intend that. However, he had already packed his equipment. Thrilled? Christmas as a child. He and Bob went for their bonding experience the following morning, leaving Linda and me by ourselves. With her hands on her hips and the door closing behind them, she murmured, "Well, we can finally organize this house since you're not occupied with that little computer job of yours." I glanced at my laptop and saw that my boss had left 3 crucial emails unopened. Then I saw Linda's resolute expression and knew that something had changed in my marriage, and not in a positive way. I had assumed that things couldn't get much worse. The doorbell rang just one day after Mark and his father had departed for their fishing excursion. When I opened it, Sarah, Tommy, and Lisa were waiting there with much more luggage than before. "Unexpected! The children have been sobbing for their grandparents," she said, pushing past me and the children. We were unable to leave. I stood in the doorway, unable to comprehend what was going on. Behind me, Linda came shrieking with joy. "My children." She gave the kids hugs. "Sarah, you're just in time, sweetheart." Jennifer started preparing dinner. I had no intention of preparing dinner. No one seemed to care that I was about to join a crucial video conference with my publishing team. I did start, in fact. "I have a crucial meeting at work." Always with the justifications. Sarah gave an eye roll. "You just sit at that computer all day pretending to work," my mother told me. The days that followed were pure agony. Mark and Bob were off having a great day fishing, but I was stuck in a chaotic house. The children destroyed everything as they rushed through each room. Sarah complained about my food while video calling pals throughout the day. Everything I did was criticized by Linda. They all had ideas about how I wasn't doing enough, but no one did anything to assist. 5 days later, Mark and his father came back from their fishing excursion, and I was prepared for a serious talk. I'd mentally practiced it, fair yet firm, outlining the impossibility of the situation. However, Mark rushed in the door, beaming with happiness, before I could say anything. "This is incredible, isn't it?" He opened his arms wide and looked about our once calm house. The entire family at one place. "We ought to do this more frequently." The room began to spin more often. Yes. I was fishing with Dad and we were conversing, and what would be fantastic if we all shared a home for a while, similar to a true family. As they dashed by us, the kids left muck all over the floor. "All I did was clean." Sarah shouted that they needed new towels from above. I seemed to be reminded by Linda that supper was almost ready. I was able to choke out Mark one. "Can we chat quietly later, honey?" He dismissed me with a wave. Dad, displaying the photos from that evening's trip to everyone. I listened to the commotion above as I lay awake in our small guest room. Our bedroom, now occupied by his parents, creaked with every movement. It was late, but Sarah's children were still playing. The microwave was being used once more. Another email from my employer buzzed through my phone. This week's second missed deadline. We must speak. My existence had devolved into a nightmare. I had a husband who couldn't or wouldn't see what was going on, children who ruined everything they touched, and strangers who treated me like their personal maid. I was resolved to finish some work before everyone else woke up, so I got up early the following morning. My home office, my final haven amid this mayhem, was where I had begun to barricade myself. However, my heart fell when I opened the door. Tommy and Lisa were sprawled on the floor, surrounded by construction paper, glue, and what appeared to be half the garden's worth of soil, while Sarah was seated at my desk with my laptop open in front of her. "Good, I see. You're awake." Sarah didn't even give me a glance. "Tomorrow is the deadline day for the children's school project. We're utilizing your laptop for study." I tried to sound steady as I said, "That's my work laptop. I have due dates. Stop being so self-centered." "Stop me, Sarah. It's for their schooling. Later, you can finish your small typing task." Mark was in the kitchen getting his work briefcase when I found him. "Mark, my office has been overrun by them. My laptop is being used by them. I am unable to work. Not right now, Jen." He checked his watch as he hurried by me. I have a meeting and I'm late. Just share the laptop, okay? For the children's school, do you feel lightheaded? I made my way to the loo. I almost puked as I opened the bathroom door, but perhaps a shower would help me think more clearly. Mud and grime were pouring out of the toilet. Footprints scuffed on the tile floor through the bulk. The walls were adorned with handprints. Yes, indeed. Behind me, Lisa's voice came through. We needed somewhere to mix the soil for our project. Tommy claimed that, since the toilet already has water, it would be fine. I stood there marveling at the damage. I heard Linda whining about lunch arrangements somewhere in the house. Sarah was shouting at the children to fetch more project materials. The toilet made a menacing gurgling. Without uttering a word, something inside of me broke. I tidied the loo. Every swipe of the mop, every scrape of the walls seemed like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. After I was done, I walked to our bedroom, which is now the guest room, and took stock of my life. I waited until Mark departed for work the following morning. After hearing his car leave the driveway, I counted to 60 and proceeded with silent efficiency. I brought my phone charger, some clothing, toiletries, and a small bag. While Sarah was in the kitchen griping about the breakfast, I was able to retrieve my laptop, which was the only item I truly needed from the office. I hadn't produced it. I sneaked out the front door without anybody noticing. No one shouted to inquire about my destination. The motel I stayed at wasn't particularly fancy, but it had 3 things that my house didn't: peace, quiet, and solitude. For the first time in weeks, I could hear myself think. I took the longest shower of my life, got room service, and actually managed to get some work done. I was anticipating that my phone would be overflowing with texts. Mark would undoubtedly notice my absence. He must be concerned. Someone would undoubtedly question where the person who handled all of the cleaning and cooking had gone. But my phone was quiet as the hours passed. Mel frantically texted and missed calls. Mel had no idea where I had gone or why. I made the decision to return home after 3 days of stillness. It was because I wanted answers, not because I missed them. I could hear laughing and music reverberating into the street as I got closer to our front door. It felt like a kick to the belly as I came in. A full-fledged celebration was underway. The ceiling was adorned with streamers. Every surface was covered with plates of food, and our living room was crowded with dozens of strangers. I went unnoticed, slept in, through the throng. In the center of the room, I saw Sarah and Mark dancing while laughing. As if they owned the room, more relatives I had never seen were sprawled on our furniture, drinking and talking. Like a ghost, I made my way through the party until I came to rest close to the kitchen. I heard them at that moment. The nicest thing is that we didn't have to pay $1 for lodging or dining out. My mother-in-law said to a woman I didn't recognize, "Our house doesn't require any repairs." All we needed was some fresh air. The woman laughed. Clever. And you also get a free housewife as part of the arrangement? Indeed. That Jennifer. Even though Linda isn't much of a housewife and is often griping about her job, her voice was brimming with disdain. Isn't it unbelievable that she actually fled 3 days ago? Her cuisine isn't missed by anybody. They started giggling. Their comments struck me like physical blows, and I stood still. Everything had been false. The faulty sewage system, the needed repairs. All of it contrived so they could enjoy a free vacation at my expense. Something inside me cracked. I forced my way through the throng until I saw Mark still drinking and dancing carelessly. "We must speak." I took hold of his arm. Right now, appearing irritated at being dragged away from his enjoyment, he followed me into the corridor. "Your mother just assured everyone that their home will never require repairs." My voice trembled as I spoke. "All they needed was a place to stay for free. Were you aware of this?" I witnessed the disintegration of our entire marriage when he shrugged. What if I did? Their household. They required a rest. A rest. They took over my house, humiliated me, and I was the one who cleaned and cooked for them. "You were aware that it was all a deception," he hissed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're an orphan, therefore you don't comprehend." The term orphan struck me hard. I saw pictures in my head. My parents died in a vehicle accident when I was 5 years old. My grandma is parenting me by herself. Her vacant seat during our wedding. "That's correct," he continued, his voice nasty. You're simply a lonely loser who doesn't understand what it means to have a truly close-knit family. Perhaps you wouldn't be such a self-centered bitch if you had one. My eyes were burning with tears, but I fought the urge to cry. I went to our old bedroom without saying a word, gathering what was left of my possessions behind me. The celebration went on as if nothing had occurred. Not even Mark attempted to stop me, Milan. I began looking for a flat online as soon as I was comfortable in my hotel room. My phone rang. My gut nodded when I saw the landlord's number flash across my screen. Jennifer. There was tightness in Mr. Peterson's voice. The neighbors have been complaining to me about your property on a regular basis. My old property. I corrected him. I no longer reside there. My spouse, Mark Thompson, received the lease. Do you recall? On the line, there was a long delay. Indeed, the neighbors have reported several unapproved occupants, noisy parties, excessive noise throughout the day, and youngsters running amok in the common spaces. That sounds awful, I said in a neutral tone of voice. However, as I already stated, I am no longer accountable for it. Mr. Peterson let out a long sigh. I would want to inform you that I will have to take the most severe action permitted by the terms of the lease. Because you were such an excellent renter for so long, I'm just giving you a call out of politeness. I said, thanks for the heads up, but you'll have to talk to Mark about this. I hung up. A burden was lifted off my shoulders. I chose not to alert Mark about the call. For once, let him face the repercussions of his decisions. In a peaceful building across town, I discovered a charming one-bedroom flat. The landlady, who lived downstairs and was a retired teacher, was grateful that I worked from home. Having someone around during the day is beneficial, she remarked. I slept through the night without being woken up by early morning chaos or midnight snacks for the first time in weeks. After 2 weeks of my quiet new existence, Mark gave Jen a call. Before I could say anything, he yelled, "We're in severe trouble. Peterson arrived today carrying a pile of documents. He's wanting double rent for the month, plus some ludicrous fee." I let him babble as I kept composing my email. Did you realize that hosting parties or overnight visitors was prohibited under the lease? How come you didn't tell me? Yes, I did tell you. Calmly, I answered. You repeatedly refused to listen, he said. Well, I didn't read the entire thing when we transferred it. Can you speak with Peterson, please? He liked you. Perhaps you could elaborate. Describe what? I interrupted him to tell him that you had illegally transferred your whole extended family into a rental home, that the neighbors have been bothered by your parties, that you disregarded all of my warnings regarding the lease. Desperately, he went on. Last night, the neighbors called the police. Mom and Dad was fined for noise offenses. Someone complained about Sarah's children roaming about the building at midnight. Jen, we need your assistance. You're capable of managing these situations. I reflected on all the occasions I had taken care of them. I had always cleaned up their mess, both symbolic and literal. No, I just said no. No, what do you mean? No, I mean, to assist you recall the true family. You have a large, close-knit family there. I'm just a lonely orphan, so you claimed I wouldn't understand. Mark, goodbye. I ended the call. She switched my phone off and went back to work. For the first time in months, I grinned. Karma doesn't always require assistance. My phone rang again the day after Mark's frantic call regarding the phones. I nearly didn't respond when his name appeared on the screen. However, I felt compelled to listen to anything he had to say. Without preamble, he declared, "They're gone. Parents, Sarah, the children, they all went. Return home, Jen." We can return to the previous state of affairs. I almost laughed at the proposal. Go back. As though the previous months were erasable, like scribbles on a wall. Mark, there's no turning back, please. His voice broke. Peterson is requesting a huge sum of money. Perhaps we could divide the expenses. The double rent and half the fine. I'm not able to pay for it myself. This time I did laugh. A harsh, unpleasant sound that astonished even me. Oh, you wish to divide things equally now. When I was preparing meals and cleaning for your whole family? Where was this justice concern? When they seized control of my house, workplace, and life? I interrupted. But what about your actual close-knit family? They'll help you pay, no doubt. After all, I'm simply a lonely orphan who doesn't comprehend family values. Recall that I learned that Peterson had evicted Mark a week later from our mutual friend Amy. She informed me that he had brought his baggage to his parents' house, but been denied entry. It was almost poetry in its irony. As I was wrapping up dinner in my quiet new apartment, Mark called me one last time. On the coffee table that morning were my divorce papers. He pleaded, "Please, Jen. Everything is gone from me, my family, the house. I was wrong. We might begin again." My lesson has been learnt. I surveyed my compact yet peaceful flat. On my desk, where I had left it, was my laptop. That's exactly where I put my coffee mug. No crayon on the walls. The floors are free of mud. The kitchen is not in disarray. "You're right about one thing, Mark." Silently, I said. "Although you lost everything, you also lost yourself. A decision at a time. Every time you put your family before our marriage, every time you disregarded my emotions, every time you saw them treat me badly, and each time you stated, 'There is nothing I can do to change it.' I've filed for divorce already," I interrupted him. "And no, we can't talk about this. You demonstrated to me your true self and your feelings for me. Think of it as a present. I won't waste any more time wondering now." I blocked his number outside my window after hanging up. On my workstation, the sky was painted in vivid pinks and oranges as the sun was sinking. A new novel was awaiting my review. Fortunately, my phone didn't make any noise. What my grandma would say if she could see me now is something I occasionally consider. Family, she often reminded me, isn't about blood. It has to do with loyalty, love, and respect. Of course, she was correct. Usually she was. I may be an orphan, as Mark so brutally pointed out. However, I at last realized something significant. Loneliness and being alone are two different things. And sometimes the family you're born with or married into isn't the family you deserve. You have to preserve yourself sometimes. And I did precisely that.